500 missiles in the air at the same time. Let that number settle for a moment. Not 10, not 50, not the kind of symbolic salvo that gets fired to make a political point and then absorbed by the news cycle within 48 hours. 500 Fattah-2 ballistic missiles, each one carrying a warhead that weighs 1.8 metric tons, each one traveling at Mach 15, each one equipped with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle that defeats the predictive intercept. Algorithms that Iron Dome David's Sling and Arrow 3 were designed around. The Iron Dome batteries positioned across northern Israel, the ones defending Haifa, the port, the Haifa Bay industrial complex, the refineries, the naval base, begin engaging the incoming threats within the first 90 seconds. The system is performing exactly as designed. Tamir interceptors launch in rapid succession. The engagement radar is tracking, prioritizing, assigning intercept solutions with the speed that only a fully automated engagement system can achieve. And then the math catches up with the hardware. Iron Dome is designed to handle salvos. It was designed specifically to handle the kind of rocket and missile salvos that Hamas and Hezbollah have historically been able to generate dozens of threats at a time, maybe 100 in an intensive barrage. It was not designed for 500 Mach 15 ballistic missiles arriving in overlapping waves, each one maneuvering in its terminal phase, each one requiring an intercept solution that accounts for a trajectory that changes in the final seconds of flight. The magazine runs dry. Not all at once, battery by battery, as the intercept rounds are exhausted faster than the resupply logistics can compensate. One battery goes Winchester, the military term for complete ammunition exhaustion, and the threats in its engagement zone pass through uncontested. Then another, then another. The warheads begin to impact, each one weighing 1.8 tons. Each one delivering an explosive yield and a blast over pressure that no structure built to civilian standards can survive. The Haifa Bay area, one of the most strategically significant industrial and military concentrations in Israel, disappears beneath a series of detonations that register on seismographs in Cyprus, in Turkey, in Egypt. Haifa falls silent. And in Washington, in the National Military Command Center beneath the Pentagon, in the Situation Room of the White House, the phones are ringing simultaneously. The screens are showing satellite imagery that no one in that building has ever seen before. And the word that is moving through every conversation, every assessment, every frantic interagency communication is a word that American strategic planners have not seriously applied to an Iranian military operation in living memory. Unstoppable. Welcome to the war desk. Today we examine how Iran's Fattah-2 ballistic missile, 500 of them, in a coordinated saturation strike, could systematically overwhelm and destroy Israel's Iron Dome air defense network, silence Haifa, and trigger a level of panic in Washington that reshapes the strategic balance of the entire Middle East. Here is what we're going to cover today. First, the mathematics of saturation. Iron Dome is a genuinely capable system. We are not going to pretend otherwise on this channel. But every defense system has a mathematical breaking point, a threshold at which the volume of incoming threats exceeds the system's physical capacity to engage them. We are going to establish exactly where that threshold is for Iron Dome and exactly how a 500 missile Fattah-2 salvo crosses it with room to spare. Second, the Fattah-2 itself. This is Iran's most advanced operational ballistic missile, Mach 15 terminal velocity, maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology, a guidance package that makes it resistant to the jamming and spoofing techniques that Israel has used to degrade earlier generation Iranian missiles, and a 1.8-ton warhead that turns every successful impact into a catastrophic destruction event. We will go deep on the technical specifications and explain why this weapon represents a qualitative leap beyond anything Iran has previously fielded. Third, Haifa as a strategic target. Why Haifa specifically? Because Haifa is not just a city. It is the concentration point for Israeli naval power, for critical industrial infrastructure, for petroleum refining capacity, and for a range of military logistics functions that the Israeli Defense Forces depend on for sustained operations. Destroying Haifa does not just kill people and level buildings. It degrades Israeli military operational capacity in ways that persist long after the immediate crisis. And fourth, the American panic response. Why does a strike on Haifa produce panic in Washington rather than simply in Tel Aviv? We will examine the specific mechanisms through which Israeli military degradation translates into American strategic crisis, and why those mechanisms make the United States more vulnerable to the consequences of this strike than most Americans understand. Let us get into it. Before we go deeper, if you found your way to the War Desk for the first time through this video, here is what we do. We analyze military conflicts and weapon systems with the technical depth and strategic honesty that mainstream media coverage almost never provides. We do not have a political agenda. We do not have an institutional relationship with any government or defense contractor that shapes what we are willing to say. We follow the analysis wherever it leads, and we present the conclusions without softening them for an audience that might find them uncomfortable. If that is the kind of analysis you are looking for, subscribe right now. Hit the bell so you get notified every time we publish. And share this video with anyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Middle East beyond the level of headlines and press releases. The community that has built up around this channel is one of the most analytically serious on the platform. Join it. Now back to the analysis. To understand what a 500-missile Fattah-2 salvo means for Israeli air defense, you need to start with a clear-eyed assessment of what Iron Dome is, what it was designed to do, and where the boundaries of its operational envelope actually lie. Iron Dome was developed by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and first deployed operationally in 2011. Its design requirements were defined by the threat environment that Israel faced at that time, specifically the unguided rocket threat from Gaza and Lebanon, Hamas's Qassam rockets, Hezbollah's Katyushas and Grads, short-range relatively slow, unguided ballistic threats that follow predictable trajectories and can be engaged with a reasonable intercept probability by the Tamir interceptor missile that Iron Dome fires. The system performs that mission extremely well. Its operational intercept rates against the threats it was designed to defeat have been consistently high. Israeli defense officials have cited figures in the high 80s to low 90% range for engagements of rockets, short-range missiles that are assessed as threatening populated areas. But the Fattah-2 is not a Qassam rocket. It is not a Katyusha. It is not even the same category of weapon as the systems that Iron Dome has engaged in its operational history. And the differences between the Fattah-2 and the threats that Iron Dome was designed to defeat are not marginal differences of degree. They are categorical differences of kind. The first categorical difference is speed. Iron Dome's Tamir interceptor has a maximum engagement velocity, a ceiling on the speed of the targets it can physically intercept. The Fattah-2 enters its terminal phase at Mach 15. For context, Mach 15 is approximately 5,100 meters per second. At that velocity, a missile descending from an apogee of several hundred kilometers covers the final 30 kilometers of its trajectory, the engagement envelope within which Iron Dome can attempt an intercept in approximately 6 seconds. 6 seconds from first engagement opportunity to impact. The Tamir interceptor needs time to reach intercept, altitude, and velocity. At Mach 15 terminal approach, that time simply does not exist in sufficient quantity for a reliable intercept solution. This is not a theoretical limitation, it is a physical one. You cannot accelerate an interceptor missile fast enough to reliably catch a target that is moving at Mach 15 inches, a 6-second engagement window, particularly when that target is also maneuvering. The second categorical difference is the maneuvering re-entry vehicle, the MaRV. Iron Dome's intercept algorithm is fundamentally a predictive system. It calculates where a target will be at the moment of intercept based on the target's observed trajectory, and it steers the Tamir interceptor to that predicted future location. This algorithm is highly effective against targets that follow predictable, unguided trajectories. The Fattah-2's MaRV defeats this algorithm by making the trajectory unpredictable. In the terminal phase, the Warhead maneuvers executing lateral and vertical course corrections that change its impact point by hundreds of meters from what the intercept algorithm predicted. By the time the Tamir interceptor reaches the predicted intercept point, the Fattah-2 warhead is somewhere else. The intercept misses. The warhead continues to its target. The third categorical difference is volume. Even setting aside the speed and maneuvering challenges, the sheer number of simultaneous incoming threats in a 500 missile salvo exceeds the engagement capacity of the Iron Dome batteries defending the Haifa area by an enormous margin. Each Iron Dome battery consists of 3 to 4 launcher units, each carrying 20 Tamir interceptors. A fully loaded battery therefore has 60 to 80 intercept rounds available before reloading. The reload process, transporting replacement launcher units to the battery position, physically replacing the expended launchers, takes time measured in hours under operational conditions, not minutes. The Iron Dome deployment defending Haifa and the northern coastal area comprises multiple batteries. Let us be generous and assume 6 to 8 batteries are available, which is at the upper end of realistic deployment density given Israel's total inventory of Iron Dome batteries and their distribution obligations across multiple threatened frontages simultaneously, at 8 batteries each with 80 rounds. The total magazine capacity available for the defense of Haifa in the opening engagement is approximately 640 Tamir interceptors. Against 500 Fattah-2 missiles, each of which requires multiple intercept attempts, given the MaRV maneuvering 640 interceptors is not a comfortable margin, it is a mathematical impossibility. The doctrine of shooting 2 interceptors per target, which Iron Dome uses to raise its per-engagement kill probability, means the system can engage approximately 320 targets before running dry. Against 500 incoming, that leaves 180 missiles flying through uncontested airspace, 180 Fattah-2 warheads, each weighing 1.8 tons, impacting a concentrated urban and industrial area without any further defensive engagement. The Haifa Bay industrial complex, which includes the country's largest oil refineries, chemical processing facilities, and the primary northern naval base, ceases to function as a coherent operational entity within the first 15 minutes of the salvo's impact sequence. The port of Haifa, through which a significant proportion of Israel's military logistics and civilian imports flow, is destroyed. The naval base, home to Israeli Navy, SAR-class corvettes, and submarine support facilities, is struck repeatedly. The city itself absorbs impacts across its residential and commercial districts. Haifa falls silent, not metaphorically, literally. Communications infrastructure destroyed, power grid collapsed, emergency response capacity overwhelmed beyond any possibility of effective function. The Fattah-2 is the most capable ballistic missile that Iran has publicly acknowledged fielding, and it represents the culmination of a precision strike development program that has been underway for over 2 decades. Formally unveiled by Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in June 2023, the Fattah-2 is the second generation of the Fattah hypersonic missile family, where the Fattah-1 introduced the basic concept of a hypersonic glide vehicle derived from a ballistic missile bus. The Fattah-2 refines and significantly extends that concept in ways that address the specific defensive countermeasures that Israel and the United States have developed in response to the first generation. The propulsion system of the Fattah-2 is a 2-stage solid fuel configuration. The first stage provides the boost phase acceleration, lifting the missile out of the atmosphere and establishing the trajectory that will carry the warhead to its target. The second stage is effectively the maneuvering re-entry vehicle itself, a hypersonic glide body that separates from the boost vehicle at altitude and conducts its descent to the target under its own aerodynamic control. The terminal velocity of Mach 15, approximately 18,000 kilometers per hour, is achieved through the combination of the boost phase energy and the gravitational acceleration during descent. At this velocity, the aerodynamic heating on the vehicle's leading surfaces reaches temperatures that would destroy conventional materials. The Fattah-2's thermal protection system, the materials used to coat the hypersonic glide body, draws on Iranian advances in high-temperature ceramic composites, a technology area in which Iran has invested heavily since the early 2010s, partly through indigenous research and partly through acquisition of relevant materials and manufacturing expertise from international sources. The guidance system of the Fattah-2 represents the most significant advance over its predecessors and over the broader Iranian ballistic missile inventory. At its core is a precision inertial navigation system, a gyroscope and accelerometer package that tracks the vehicle's position and velocity continuously throughout the flight. Iranian INS technology has advanced dramatically over the past decade, driven by improvements in MEMS gyroscope precision and by the development of error correction algorithms that compensate for the cumulative drift that affects all inertial systems over long flight durations. Layered on top of the INS is a multi-constellation satellite navigation receiver that processes signals from GPS, GLONASS, and the Chinese Beidou navigation system simultaneously. The use of 3 independent satellite navigation constellations provides substantial redundancy against jamming an adversary. Would need to jam all 3 constellations simultaneously and with sufficient power to deny signal acquisition, which is a significantly more demanding electronic warfare task than jamming a single constellation receiver. The terminal guidance layer, the capability that produces the metric level precision that makes the Fattah-2 a genuine precision strike weapon rather than a glorified area weapon, combines a laser ring gyroscope, ultra-precise attitude sensing during the terminal maneuver phase, with a scene-matching electro-optical guidance system. The scene matching system functions by comparing real-time imagery from the vehicle's forward-looking sensor against a stored reference image of the target, correcting course continuously to minimize the offset between the vehicle's predicted impact point and the designated aim point. The 1.8-ton warhead payload is a figure that deserves careful unpacking because the raw tonnage number does not fully convey the destructive mechanism. The warhead mass of 1.8 metric tons, 1800 kilograms, is composed of a combination of the explosive charge and the casing. The explosive charge in the penetrating warhead configuration is typically a dense, insensitive, high-explosive RDX-based or HMX-based compound that provides maximum energy release per unit volume while remaining safe to handle during the fueling and transport phase. The casing of a penetrating warhead is engineered to be a weapon in itself, a dense, hardened steel or tungsten alloy body that carries enough kinetic energy at impact to punch through reinforced concrete before the explosive charge detonates against a reinforced concrete structure, the kind used for military bunkers, command centers, and hardened industrial facilities. A penetrating 1.8-ton warhead can defeat between 2 and 4 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating its main charge. Against above-ground civilian and industrial structures, the buildings, refineries, port facilities, and naval infrastructure that make up the Haifa target complex, the penetrating warhead is essentially overkill. The kinetic energy of a 1.8-ton mass traveling at hypersonic velocity is sufficient to destroy any non-hardened structure through impact alone before the explosive charge even functions. The blast overpressure from the subsequent detonation extends the destruction radius to encompass adjacent structures. The combination kinetic penetration followed by high explosive detonation produces a destruction footprint per warhead that is substantially larger than an equivalent mass of conventional explosive delivered by slower, non-penetrating munitions. Each successful Fattah-2 impact is not a point event, it is a zone of destruction extending tens to hundreds of meters from the impact point depending on the target type and the specific warhead configuration. Multiply that destruction zone by 180 successful impacts, the number that penetrate the exhausted Iron Dome defense, and the resulting aggregate destruction covers virtually the entire Haifa Bay industrial and military complex. The anti-jamming and electronic warfare resistance of the Fattah-2 is the final technical characteristic that needs examination, because it addresses the defensive countermeasure that Israel and the United States would attempt to employ against a salvo of this scale even before the first Tamir interceptors are fired. Electronic warfare, specifically GPS jamming and signal spoofing, has been a cornerstone of Israeli and American missile defense philosophy since the early 2000s. The theory is that a missile whose navigation depends on GPS signals can be defeated by jamming those signals, causing the guidance system to lose its fix and the missile to miss its target by a potentially large margin. The Fattah-2's multi-constellation navigation architecture defeats this approach in 2 ways. First, as noted, jamming 3 independent satellite constellations simultaneously requires electronic warfare assets of a scale and power that are not routinely available in the operational environment above northern Israel. Second, and more fundamentally, the Fattah-2's guidance does not depend on satellite navigation for its terminal accuracy. The scene-matching electro-optical system operates entirely passively. It does not emit any signal that can be jammed, and it does not receive any signal that can be spoofed. It compares images, no external signal required. This means that even in a fully GPS-denied environment, even if American and Israeli electronic warfare assets succeed in completely blacking out the satellite navigation signal over northern Israel, the Fattah-2 continues to navigate accurately in its terminal phase. The jamming that might have worked against a Shahab 3 inches 2005 is irrelevant against the guidance architecture of the Fattah 2 inches, the operational environment of today. The American response to a successful 500-missile Fattah-2 strike on Haifa would begin with a period of stunned assessment that would last longer than anyone in Washington would later be comfortable admitting. The reason for that paralysis is not institutional incompetence. It is the genuine novelty of the intelligence picture. American strategic planning for a conflict involving Iran has operated for years under a set of assumptions about Iranian missile capability that the Fattah-2 salvo would in a single engagement render obsolete. The assumption that Iron Dome provides reliable area defense against Iranian ballistic missiles. The assumption that Iran does not possess the magazine depth to sustain a saturation attack of this scale. The assumption that the combination of active missile defense and electronic warfare countermeasures would degrade Iranian salvo effectiveness to manageable levels. All of those assumptions are destroyed simultaneously within the first hour of the engagement. And the institutions that built their planning around those assumptions, U.S. Central Command, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Council, would need time to absorb that destruction and recalibrate before they could generate coherent recommendations for the National Command. Authority. That recalibration time is the window in which the panic is most visible and most consequential. The immediate military response would involve the activation of contingency plans for the deployment of additional defensive assets to the region. THAAD batteries, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, which operates at higher altitude and against faster threats than Iron Dome, would be ordered to deploy to Israel. Additional Patriot Pack-3 batteries would be moved from European and Gulf storage positions. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, if not already in the Eastern Mediterranean, would be ordered to transit immediately. But here is the strategic problem, that the panic response immediately encounters none of these reinforcement measures address the fundamental vulnerability that the Fattah-2 salvo has just demonstrated. THAAD is more capable against hypersonic threats than Iron Dome, but it faces the same mathematical saturation problem when the incoming salvo is measured in the hundreds. Additional Patriot batteries extend the defended area, but do not solve the magazine exhaustion problem. The Carrier Strike Group provides offensive options, but does not restore the defensive capability that has just been demonstrated to be inadequate. The military response, in other words, can generate visible activity, ship movements, aircraft deployments, public statements of commitment, without actually solving the strategic problem that the strike has created. And that gap between visible activity and actual strategic restoration is precisely where the panic lives. The geopolitical dimension of the American response is equally fraught. The United States would face immediate pressure from Israel for a direct military strike on Iranian missile production and storage facilities, the kind of deep strike that would require American assets, American basing rights, and American political commitment to an escalation ladder that has no clear top. The calculation that Washington faces in that moment is genuinely agonizing. Striking Iran's missile infrastructure risks escalation to a broader regional war, one that draws in Hezbollah, draws in Iranian proxy forces across Iraq and Syria, potentially draws in a response against American bases throughout our region. Not striking allows Iran to retain the capability it has just demonstrated and invites further use of that capability against additional Israeli targets. Neither option is acceptable. Both options are on the table simultaneously. The decision-makers in the Situation Room would be working with degraded intelligence under enormous time pressure, with allies demanding immediate action and adversaries watching for any sign of hesitation. That is the anatomy of strategic panic at the highest level. The 500 missile salvo does something to the psychological architecture of the conflict that no battle damage assessment can fully capture. For Israel, the psychological impact of watching Iron Dome, the system that has defined Israeli civilian security for over a decade, the system that Israeli political leaders have pointed to as the answer to the missile threat, the system whose success rates have been cited in hundreds of press conferences and parliamentary briefings. Watching that system run dry and fail is not merely a military setback. It is the destruction of a national security narrative. The Israeli public has been told repeatedly and with genuine confidence by their leadership that Iron Dome protects them, that the missile threat from Iran, while serious, is manageable within the existing defensive architecture, that the investment in air defense technology has purchased a meaningful shield between Iranian aggression and Israeli civilian life. The 500 missile salvo proves that narrative false, not partially false, categorically false. And the political consequences of that falsification, the collapse of public confidence in the security establishment's threat assessments, the delegitimization of the leaders who made those assurances, the raw fear in the civilian population that the protection they were promised does not exist, those consequences would reshape Israeli domestic politics in ways that would persist for a generation. For Iran, the psychological dynamic is the precise inverse. The successful execution of a 500 missile saturation strike against the most heavily defended airspace in the Middle East, against a defensive system backed by decades of American technical development and billions of dollars of investment, would represent a validation of Iranian strategic patience that is almost impossible to overstate. Iran has spent 30 years building this capability under sanctions, under assassination campaigns targeting its scientists, under cyber attacks targeting its nuclear and missile programs, under constant military pressure from adversaries who were materially wealthier, technologically more advanced, and geopolitically better supported. The 500 missile salvo that silences Haifa is the answer to all of that pressure. It is the demonstration that the investment was worth it, that the doctrine was correct, that the capability is real. That validation reverberates through the entire Iranian military and political establishment. It strengthens the position of every faction that has argued for continued investment in the precision missile program. It validates every sacrifice made by the engineers and scientists who built these weapons. It confirms for the Iranian public that their country's resistance to Western pressure has produced genuine strategic capability. The will and spirit factor in this scenario belongs to Iran. And that asymmetry in institutional confidence and public morale is as strategically significant as the physical destruction in Haifa. Pull back from the immediate crisis and look at what a successful 500-missile Fattah-2 saturation strike on Haifa means for the global strategic order. The most immediate global consequence is the demonstration that mass missile saturation can defeat the most advanced Western-backed air defense systems currently deployed. Iron Dome is not just an Israeli system. It is the flagship of a defensive philosophy. The idea that precision interception technology can neutralize the missile threat at an acceptable cost, providing area defense for civilian populations without requiring offensive preemption. That philosophy has informed billions of dollars of American defense investment, has been exported to American allies in multiple regions, and has shaped the defensive doctrine of NATO's eastern flank. The 500-missile saturation of Iron Dome does not just defeat an Israeli system, it defeats a philosophy. It demonstrates empirically that against a sufficiently large and capable salvo, the cost-exchange ratio of defensive interception becomes prohibitively unfavorable. Each Tamir interceptor costs approximately $50,000. Each Fattah-2 missile costs, in the most generous Western estimate, between $1 and $2 million. But when 500 of them arrive simultaneously and the defense runs out of interceptors, the per-missile cost comparison becomes irrelevant. The missiles that get through are getting through for free. This demonstration would accelerate investment in mass ballistic missile programs among every state actor that has been deterred from developing such programs by confidence in American and Israeli defensive capabilities. North Korea, which already possesses significant ballistic missile capability, would draw lessons about salvo size and saturation tactics. China, in the context of Taiwan, would incorporate the saturation defeat of Patriot and THAAD batteries into its operational planning with renewed confidence. Russia, operating against NATO air defense in any future European conflict, would update its assessments of the magazine exhaustion timelines for Western systems. Dưới đây là phiên bản viết lại khoảng 1350 từ giữ nguyên lập luận nhưng mạch lạc mạnh hơn về nhịp điệu và chiều sâu phân tích. The second global consequence is not simply military, it is strategic realignment at the state level, particularly across the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Kuwait have collectively invested tens of billions of dollars into American-supplied defensive architecture, Patriot missile batteries, THAAD systems, integrated radar networks designed to detect and intercept ballistic threats before they reach critical infrastructure. These systems were not merely purchases of hardware, they were purchases of confidence. Confidence in a security umbrella backed by the United States. Confidence that investment could substitute for vulnerability, and confidence that alignment with Washington would ensure protection against regional threats. A demonstrated failure of those systems against a large-scale Iranian missile salvo would shatter that confidence immediately. Because what such a demonstration reveals is not a marginal weakness, but a structural limitation. Missile defense systems are constrained by magazine depth, interceptor cost, and engagement geometry. When confronted with a sufficiently large, coordinated, and technologically sophisticated barrage, especially one involving maneuvering re-entry vehicles, even advanced systems can be saturated. The Gulf states understand this. Their strategic calculus is not ideological. It is survival-based. And once the perception takes hold that American-supplied defenses cannot reliably protect critical infrastructure, oil facilities, desalination, plants, ports, and cities, the logic of their alignment begins to shift. They are then faced with a stark choice: continue relying on a defensive architecture that has just been publicly stress-tested and found wanting, or begin accelerating political accommodation with the very actor that has demonstrated the ability to penetrate that defense. The early stages of that accommodation are already visible. Diplomatic normalization, economic engagement, and de-escalatory signaling between Gulf capitals and Tehran have been unfolding in recent years. A successful, large-scale precision strike would not initiate this trend, it would accelerate it dramatically. And once that acceleration begins, it is extremely difficult to reverse, because alignment decisions, once made under conditions of perceived vulnerability, tend to harden into long-term strategic posture. The third global consequence is economic, and it operates through the oil market but extends far beyond it. Haifa is not just a city. It is a critical node in Israel's energy infrastructure. Its refineries process a significant share of domestic petroleum demand, and its port serves as a major entry point for energy imports. the destruction or severe degradation of that infrastructure would create an immediate and localized energy crisis. But the global impact does not come from the physical loss alone, it comes from the signal. Markets do not price events, they price risk. And the signal that a successful precision strike on Haifa sends to global markets is that Middle Eastern energy infrastructure, long assumed to be relatively protected by a combination of geography, defense systems, and deterrence, is in fact vulnerable to large-scale, high-precision ballistic missile attack. That realization forces an immediate repricing. Oil traders adjust their models, sovereign wealth funds reassess exposure, insurance companies recalculate premiums for shipping routes through the Persian Gulf, energy firms reconsider the security assumptions underlying their investments. The result is a cascading economic effect. Oil prices spike not necessarily because supply has collapsed, but because the risk premium attached to that supply has increased dramatically. Shipping costs rise, insurance rates climb, volatility increases across energy markets. And because energy is a foundational input into the global economy, affecting transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and logistics that volatility propagates outward, it becomes inflationary pressure, it becomes political pressure, it becomes a global issue, not a regional one. A single strike, or even the credible demonstration of such a strike, thus extends its influence far beyond the immediate battlefield. This is the nature of modern strategic systems. They are interconnected. Military events trigger economic reactions, which trigger political responses, which feed back into military planning. No single framework, military, economic, or diplomatic, is sufficient to capture the full scope of the consequences. That is why it is essential to approach this analysis holistically. Now, let us bring the discussion to its conclusion. What has been outlined here is not a speculative fantasy constructed for dramatic effect. It is a scenario built from components that are individually real, documented, and observable. The missile systems in question exist. Their performance characteristics, including speed, maneuverability, and guidance capability, are supported by both official statements and independent assessments. The limitations of missile defense systems are not theoretical. They are derived from known physical and engineering constraints. The strategic importance of targets like Haifa is not debated. It is a matter of geography and infrastructure. What has been done in this analysis is to combine those elements into a coherent operational scenario and then follow the consequences of that scenario without distortion. That last point is critical, because one of the persistent challenges in strategic analysis is the presence of institutional bias. Governments have incentives to project confidence. Defense establishments have incentives to emphasize capability and downplay vulnerability. Media systems often amplify simplified narratives that align with those projections. The result is a gap between public perception and underlying reality. Closing that gap requires a willingness to examine uncomfortable conclusions. And the conclusion here is in fact uncomfortable. Iran has developed a missile capability that is not merely about volume, but about precision at scale. The combination of large inventory, high speed, and terminal maneuverability creates a threat profile that can stress and, under certain conditions, overwhelm existing defensive systems. This does not mean those systems are useless. It does not mean defense is impossible. But it does mean that defense is no longer guaranteed, and that distinction matters enormously in strategic planning. 500 missiles is not an abstract number. For a country that has invested heavily in ballistic missile development over decades, it is a plausible operational figure. And when those missiles are deployed in a coordinated manner against a concentrated target set, the effects can be decisive. The implications of that capability are already understood at the highest levels of government. This is visible not in public statements which tend to emphasize reassurance, but in investment patterns. Israel's increasing focus on layered defense-directed energy systems and next-generation interceptors reflects an awareness that current systems must evolve to meet emerging threats. The United States likewise continues to invest in advanced missile defense, space-based tracking, and integrated command networks. These are not the actions of actors who believe the problem is solved. They are the actions of actors who understand that the threat environment is changing. There is therefore a divergence between what is said publicly and what is acted upon privately. That divergence is not accidental. It serves short-term strategic purposes, maintaining deterrence, preserving confidence, avoiding panic. But it also carries a cost. It leaves broader audiences unprepared for the realities of the evolving threat landscape. The purpose of analysis like this is to reduce that gap, not to induce fear, not to advocate for any particular policy, but to provide a clearer understanding of the systems at play so that decisions at every level can be made with greater awareness. Because the world that is emerging is not one defined by absolute dominance. It is one defined by contested capability. Multiple actors possess the means to impose meaningful costs on each other. No actor can assume immunity. No system can be assumed to function perfectly under all conditions. That reality introduces risk, but it also introduces constraint. When all sides understand that escalation carries real consequences, immediate, tangible, and potentially irreversible, the incentive to manage that escalation increases. Communication becomes more important. Signaling becomes more precise. Miscalculation becomes more dangerous, but also more actively avoided. This is the paradox of modern deterrence. Greater capability can lead to greater instability at the margins, but also to stronger incentives for restraint at the center. Navigating that paradox requires clarity. Clarity about capabilities, clarity about limitations, clarity about the difference between perception and reality. And above all, clarity about the fact that strategic systems do not remain static. They evolve with technology, with doctrine, and with the actions of the actors within them. What we are witnessing now is one phase of that evolution. Understanding it is the first step toward managing it.